Good morning. You're watching Much Ado About Something today, and I'm Donna. Well, I'm out here in the garden. I'm out here in the backyard. I'm going to take you around the vegetable garden. I'm going to see what I can get out of the garden to put up for the Every Bit Counts challenge. Now, it has rained, and I want you to look how much this garden has grown. You know, it had a slow go. It really was struggling to take off. We got it in late this year, and we were struggling for it to take off. But it has really, with all the rain that we've had lately from the tropical storm Debbie and the other things, look at it. It is just, I don't think I've ever saw it quite this full. This is the cucumbers, of course, across this cattle panel that we made an arch out of. And since the rain, it has just covered the panel completely. And it has just taken off. Now we got a cucumber that bit the dust down there. You see, it looks like it fell off, and there's things been chawing on it. But that's okay. We'll just give that and let that go. Look and see what kind of cucumbers we got. Now I have already picked the cucumbers yesterday because we eat a lot of cucumbers for fresh eating. We make the fresh pickles from them, and we love cucumber sandwiches. And just to slice a cucumber and dip it in dip. Doesn't look like there's too much out here this morning. There's some growing, but where we picked yesterday, there's not a whole lot hanging here ready to eat on these cucumber vines. Look at that up there. Isn't that pretty? Still have a lot of blooms, so there'll be a lot of cucumbers to come. Not going to sweat any of that. Not going to worry about it. Let's go see what else is here. We've just been plucking everything off as soon as it comes because it's been so good. Well, we've got some basil here. We'll go ahead and harvest some basil. I love basil. Wish I could share the smell of this with you. And if I don't have a purpose to use it today, I certainly will have a purpose for it later. It's always good to dry it and use it for later. Got a little basket of basil. The squash look like they're finally taking off down here. And there might be one little bumpy squash here. And it looks like he's holding up the whole plant. But we'll throw him in the basket. So there's not a whole lot to harvest. The tomatoes, we've got green tomatoes down here, but no ripe ones today. We've got a few. Now we trellis things up in this small garden. You see we put those cucumbers on that trellis, and we don't trellis it to get a better yield or for them to be easier to get to. We trellis it because we've got a really small area that we grow our gardens. We've got two little gardens back here that are our vegetable gardens, and we trellis our cucumbers and our tomatoes so that we can grow vertically and so that we can grow more in the space. Has nothing to do with really any other factor, even though trellising the cucumbers really does make it easier to get to them. I'm looking on the back side because those cucumbers can hide from you. And you can see this tomato is on the ground. Donald's family grew their tomatoes on the ground, or either they strung them up with string. These tomatoes were on the trellis. I've got to get back out here and lift some of them up because the storm knocked some of them down. You go over here and look at the other little garden. No tomatoes ripe today. No cucumbers. Of course, we did pick yesterday, so we got quite a few things yesterday. And then heading up here to our little garden. There's more squash blooms. They're looking really good. The tomatoes look good. Plenty of little tomatoes. There always are. There, it's a generous blooming and fruiting plant, those little tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. And there are some tomatoes growing in the sun. They'll be our next pick. There's some cucumbers, and they've climbed on the outside of the fence. My variegated nasturtiums look fine. I'm going to take the top 2 leaves. I'm going to eat these leaves this morning. They're good in a salad. They're kind of peppery, and they're a great antibiotic for a plant if you want to use it for medicinal use. You can research that, find out all the properties of the nasturtium. I'm going to munch on these 2 leaves this morning. Now here on the back side of the garden, there are green tomatoes. Good morning, girls. It doesn't focus good because the fence is in the way to show you the chickens. But over here is our little cucumber that we've got here. And there's a couple of little cucumbers we can pull off and harvest. We'll, of course, use those for fresh eating. Those will be gone before they ever last a day, probably around here. I'm not going to harvest the little tomatoes because they'll be out here snacking on them. The kiddos and Donald, they like to just eat them right off the vine. I think that's all there is to harvest today. I think I'm just going to go in here and see what I have to put up today for day 11 of the Every Bit Counts challenge. I have stepped on out here in the front yard because there's a few herbs that I want to harvest out here today. Let me get my scissors. Come right on out here to the little perennial herb garden, which is looking pretty rough. Of course, it did enjoy the rain, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done out here. I'm going to grab some of this sage. To go in some dishes. I use fresh sage and dried sage in my recipes. I like to get this tender sage for some of the fresh recipes. Well, that looks good. There's plenty of oregano out here too. I think I'll just get some of that. Cross right over here. And cut some of this good oregano. All that oregano smells good too. And then there's some thyme down here. It has already gone to bloom, so I think I'll leave that thyme there, right here, and just let it bloom and not worry about harvesting that thyme. I'm going to get a little bit more of this oregano. I foundered myself out on oregano. If you don't know what foundering is, that's an Appalachian word for you made yourself sick of it. And if you eat too much of one thing, we always were taught you'll founder yourself on that. That means it'll make you sick and you won't want to eat it again for a long time, if ever. Well, I made a cheese ball one year for Christmas, and I rolled it in oregano, and I ate way too much of that cheese ball that Christmas, and I foundered myself on oregano. So I was young when that happened, but I have learned to go ahead and limit myself on how much I eat of anything, so that I don't founder myself on it. It's a wild grape. Let me turn you around here. It's a wild grape growing down here in this perennial herb garden. I've got to get out here and work. Me and Donald are going to have a work day soon. Of course, I'll try to film that for you. The mullein has completely dried up. You can see that there. It is now becoming a stand for the morning glory. But the mullein has completely dried. I am letting that seed, but I am struggling with the birds and the seeds this year. The birds want to eat everything I have. This oregano, it'll be back, but it needs to be cut down to the ground. It's got way leggy. I've had this little stand of oregano for quite a while. The catnip needs to be cut back. Here's that good rosemary. I was talking with my friend Tina at a greenhouse here locally, and I was telling her, you know, it took me quite a while to get rosemary to grow here outside. I lost several rosemaries before I ever got them to live out here. Now that I have 3 stands of it, they're doing fine. But it took me a long time to grow rosemary. I have friends that has the rosemary as big as bushes. They're huge. I mean 6 feet tall rosemary bushes. And Tina was telling me that it's the kind. It depends on the kind of rosemary that you buy, whether or not it will survive the winters where you're at or not in your zone. So I guess I accidentally got the wrong kind the right kind instead of the wrong kind for a change. So I'm really happy to have that rosemary, have that thing here growing. And I've got 2 more. I've got 2 more out in the front garden and 1 down here at the other end, because I wanted to be sure to have it. And of course my comfrey, it gave me a scare because it kind of, when it was dry, died back down to nothing. I've always heard it's really hard to kill comfrey. If you ever have a stand of comfrey, the roots go so deep that you will always have comfrey. But I'm telling you, this thing looked so terrible at one point. I thought I was going to have to kiss it goodbye and buy some more comfrey, but I didn't. My brother-in-law gave me this comfrey, and I want to keep it going. It seems like the things that I get from my friends and family that's locally grown or grown close by does a whole lot better than the stuff that I buy that's not grown locally. But the comfrey came back and it's looking good, and I'm happy with that. And I've probably mentioned that before because that was a real concern. This is a treasure in my garden and not something that I want to lose. It's a medicinal plant that I use to make salves and a lot of things, and I just appreciate having it. Don't want to lose my comfrey stand. I think I will divide it and try to get one going somewhere else in case something does happen to this one. I was concerned a little bit because it's kind of shaded here. It does get some sun. It gets evening sun, but I was hoping that it got enough sun where it's at. So there's a lot of little trees here in the perennial garden. I've got all kinds of red buds and everything else that we've got to pull out of here. So this needs to be cleaned up. We want to move the blueberry bushes, which are in the backyard, up here where they'll get more sun. You can see all the sun they're getting right here. So we've got to make that change, and we'll do that as soon as we can. I have to walk by the rain gauge to go back in the house, and I'll share with you the jungle-like conditions of my garden today. But you can see the rain gauge is full. It is completely full. In just the last few days, I'd say the last 4 days, we've had a tremendous amount of rain. just a tremendous amount of rain. More than 5 inches. I would say at least 6 inches of rain. We'll start afresh. We'll see what we get from now on. Of course, I hadn't had to water too much because we got so much rain. But that rain, it was a good deep soaking for a lot of things that needed it. But it'll only last for so long, and then I'll have to turn around and start the watering process again. Look at that clematis. I always leave the clematis there after it blooms, so when it seeds, look how pretty the little seed pods are. They're fluffy. Sometimes I cut these off and put them in my fall displays, and it's a beautiful item to have. But I almost have a jungle, and I will do a tour of this garden soon. There have been so many butterflies out here on the butterfly weed, you know, that's in the middle garden, and all of these passion flowers that are blooming, and all of these other things that are here. This whole front yard was covered in butterflies last week. The kids had such a treat, such a ball. You can see the playroom window is right there, and they were able to look out and see all of the butterflies. And my little grandson, he was so happy. He was like, "Grammy, there's butterflies all over the garden." Oh, I made it inside with my little bounty I got out of the garden today. I'm going to take this sage and go ahead and put a rubber band on it. Get it ready to hang on my drying rack. Whoops. That rubber band's no good. Let me try this one. Now I'm just going to take these and hang them up on my rack over here, my drying rack that I have. This is that little bit of oregano. I may take this one and just put it in the kitchen because it's so small. I just go hang it in there near the kitchen. Here's the basil, the fresh basil. I'm keeping out a little bit of basil because I'm going to use that fresh. And I'm just going to, here's some of the oregano that got mixed in when I was putting it all in the basket. Well, I'm just going to take this bit of basil here. And hang it up. Oh, I got a piece of sage stuck in there. We won't need that. I can lay it out here with the basil for fresh using. And I'm just going to take these little bits of herbs that I've gathered and put the rubber band around them. And I'm going to hang them right up over here on the drying rack. Now, I've shared with you before my drying rack that I've got here in the hallway of the house. When you come into the house and come up the steps, this is in the hallway. And I took down the passion flower and made tea, my dried passion flower, and made tea. So I've got a few hooks here that I can put other things in. There's basil. Here's the sage. Now you can label these if you need to. I make labels for them sometimes, especially when I have big batches. But in general, I know what all of these are. We're close to the bedroom and my granddaughter's watching her. She's watching her videos in there. She has autism and Down syndrome, so I can't interfere with that. But I hope that you can see. I tried to turn the lights on here so you could see these dried herbs good here. And these house a lot of the herbs. Most of the herbs that I use, I dry this way. That's a very natural way to dry herbs. You don't have any money invested into it. It's just making use of a space that I already had in the house. and that's how I dry most everything that I dry. I do lay some things like the berries and things out flat to dry. And this is what I've got going on now. We've got elderberries drying. That was that little bit that I didn't process because I had just harvested them that day. I've got mullein drying right here, flowers, and I'm going to use some of the seeds from that mullein. Got plenty of other herbs growing here, as well as seeds drying. Got several seeds laying out to dry. And sometimes I may just have a little bit of herbs, like here's a little bit sprig of rosemary. I'll be using this rosemary while I cook. Now I can take that rosemary and either ground it up or cut it up and put it into a spice jar. But I just will sometimes have those herbs somewhere near the stove here in the kitchen where I can get to them when I know that I need them. Well, that's my day 10 of putting up and harvesting my herbs, getting them just a few. It's just a handful, but every little bit counts. And this, every bit counts. And this is my every bit I'm just adding to my drying rack today. I thank you for joining me and let me share it with you. Like always, until next time.